So black bears are really common in Connecticut. Has anyone not seen one? Right? It's like everyone has seen them just walking around. In fact, actually, this morning when I was out with my wife walking our dog, there was a black bear right in the neighborhood. It's very common. There's an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 in Connecticut, and almost so far at this time of the year, there has been 8,000 sightings in Connecticut, and that's vastly underrated because you know how they know how many sightings there are? You have to report it. Has anyone ever reported a bear sighting? I did. When I first moved here and I heard that there were black bears in the area, and the first time I saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, it's a bear walking across our yard, and I reported it. And after a couple of sightings, you're like, oh, I see them all the time now, and I stopped doing it, right? So these are 8,000 people who are actually like, no, I got to help Connecticut. It's deep, right? DEEP, right? Track this stuff. But I would guess this 8,000 is more like 80,000, maybe 100,000 sightings, and people just like, whatever, right? And so black bears are about 4 to 6 feet in length, about 400 to 500 pounds as adults. Their bite is about 800 psi, that's pounds per square inch. And you're like, well, what does that mean? So a human, on average, an adult human is about 150. Okay, so that just gives you like an understanding of like how strong their bites are. But here's the crazy thing. Do you want to know what the Guinness Book of World Record for human bite, like the strongest human bite is? 975. What man or woman has a bite that is stronger than a black bear? Like, I want to meet this person, but stay clear away. But that's insane. Okay, but anyways, lions are actually kind of similar. Okay, they're about 5 to 8 feet in length minus a tail, so they're maybe like a little bit longer, a little bit leaner, but like when it comes to like their weight, about 4 to 500 pounds as well, and their bite is about similar, 600 to 1,000 psi, right? So a lion is actually kind of similar to a bear, and so because we're in Daniel chapter 6 today, and we're doing Daniel in the lion's den, I want you to picture, because it's hard for us to picture like, oh no, Daniel is like with a bunch of lions. That's scary, because we don't have lions around here, right? But if you just think, like instead of just replace those lions with bears that you've seen, and just make them maybe a little bit thinner, a little bit longer, more of a tannish color, it's like, yeah, that's like a lion, right? And because if you've ever been close to a bear, it is a little bit startling. When it's far away, like we were probably 100 yards away, it's like, oh, look, it's a bear. And the bear's looking at us like, oh, these humans, like always like staring at us, right? But one time I was walking my dog, and I kind of just like got past like a big bush, and the bear was right on the other side. And so like all of a sudden I'm like face to face with the bear. It was probably closer to where the tech table was, and it was just like, ah! And I was like all freaked out. The bear just looked at me, continued doing its thing, and just walked away because bears don't care about us, right? But it is scary when you get a little close. You realize they are big animals. Okay, so now if you're trying to picture what Daniel was like, what kind of situation he was in, you can think of it as, like tan bears. Okay, maybe that's how you do it. Right. So we're in chapter 6 today of our Daniel series, and spoiler: the main point is going to be like Daniel, right? And you're like, oh, I kind of guessed that, right? But we're going to do things a little bit different, because I think a lot of messages on Daniel in the lion's den is usually like, oh, like God is going to save you if you like stand up and pray and for your faith. And that's, that God does amazing things when we are faithful in spite of difficult circumstances and that kind of stuff. That's absolutely true. But I'm going to actually take a little different approach to it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what Daniel is like in chapter 6. And then we're going to look at how we, when I say we, I mean like the church in America, are often very much not like Daniel. In fact, we are often the opposite of what Daniel is like. And we're going to look at like, how did this happen? Like, what are we, what are Christians doing that are kind of getting us off track here? And then we're going to look at, okay, so if we're supposed to be like Daniel and we're often not, how do we be more like Daniel? Okay? So that's kind of how we're going to do things today. So let's jump in. So first, okay, so we're in chapter 6. The first thing I want to do is I want to recap Daniel's career for a moment, right? Because we know he started as a captive of Babylon, right? So he was in either the officials or the royal family in Jerusalem, and when Jerusalem fell to Babylon, he is taken as a captive and a slave, right? But they take all of the really talented people and they kind of force them to kind of serve the empire of Babylon. And so Daniel rose to be the top advisor and administrator to King Nebuchadnezzar. And after King Nebuchadnezzar dies and it's Belshazzar, Daniel is basically demoted and forgotten, right? So he is just like, nobody even cares about him anymore. And then when Belshazzar falls and Babylon falls to Persia, Daniel again, as this chapter 6 said, kind of rises in the ranks under King Darius, and now he is one of the top administrators again, right? In verse 1 and 2 it said, it pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel, okay? And then in verse 3 to 5, it says this, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. And so we find that the reason why all these other administrators are really hate Daniel is it comes down to jealousy, right? There's jealousy involved, and there's also going to be anti-Semitism, right? It's not explicitly said here, but that's kind of always happening. And so they really hated Daniel. Right? And so they tricked Daniel into passing this law that banned prayer to anyone or any god except Darius for 30 days. And in their culture and their government, even laws made by even the king cannot change laws once he kind of puts them in place. And they really appeal to his pride because this is one of those things where it's like it's a 30-day law. It's like what does this actually do? But for the king, he's like, oh yeah, you guys think I'm awesome, right? It sounds good. And so he's like, yeah, sure. He wasn't kind of thinking through why the other administrators might have done this. And the other administrators, right? They knew Daniel better than Darius knew Daniel, even though Daniel was Darius's like favorite administrator, and they knew that Daniel would continue to be faithful in his prayers. And here's where I want to kind of focus a little bit on today. But look at how Daniel responds when this law is made. In verse 10, it says, now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. And so Daniel hears this and he continues to kind of be faithful in his prayers. And so Daniel, we see, right, from chapter 6 and also just like throughout Daniel, the book of Daniel, has always conducted himself with faithfulness, with like a quiet humility, and he has incredible work ethic and a lot of integrity. Okay, so that's how Daniel kind of conducts himself, and he's faithful to God first, but he also served Babylon and then Persia really faithfully, right? And so what we see is, okay, so here's a guy who yeah, God is first. He's in this country that has basically taken over his, and so he became a captive, but he's going to serve them faithfully. He wasn't out to like cause trouble with his faith, right? He wasn't like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go into the public square and do my prayers there. He did it quietly in his home, right? And now, of course, the whole point of that is because the other administrators are going to go and like spy on him to get him in trouble. But Daniel was never out to kind of like make a statement, be this loud, like person is like, look at my faith, look at how faithful I am to God. He did it quietly, right? And they have that. I love that quiet humility he has, and he lets his actions show God's power, right? He obviously had an incredible ability. God blessed him with the ability to interpret dreams, but he wasn't. It's not like Daniel was like advertising this, right? But he like displayed it when called upon. Right, so when Nebuchadnezzar called him and said, "Hey, I heard this," he was bold in how he kind of like shared God's power and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't the showy thing, okay? And so that's kind of who Daniel is, right? He's someone who is humble. He's someone who's faithful. He has an incredible integrity. Okay. Now I'm gonna skip over like an analysis of the lion's den itself, even though like my weird brain like really wants to go there, right? Because I ask questions like, hey, was the entrance to the lion's den, was it more like staircase down, like, hey, open, and like shove Daniel in? Or was it like on top? Because I've seen pictures of that where they had to lower him down. I don't know, right? It's not important, right? I wonder, were the lions growling at Daniel like, I want to eat Daniel? And then, but they were scared of the angel, and the angel's like, back off, you know? Or were the lions kind of really friendly toward Daniel because the angel's like, hey, friend, not food. And then the lions became like giant, like kitty cats, and Daniel like snuggled with them at night. Like, I don't know, like, and I wonder about that. Not important, okay? Or did the angel stick around throughout the night because he needed to, and like just chatting with Daniel, like, hey, so see any good shows, lately? Or did the angel like, hey, lions, back off? Lions are like, okay, I'm gonna go now. Like, I don't know, like, not important, so I'm gonna skip that, even though that's where my brain goes, okay? What I do wanna do is look at Darius' response in verse 26 and 27. It says, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Right? This is actually a similar response to how Nebuchadnezzar responded when Daniel interprets his dreams and those kind of things, right? There's this acknowledgement of God, but it doesn't appear that this is a worship of God, right? Because he still says, God of Daniel, right? Not, this is my God, or I'm going to worship God, right? Nebuchadnezzar didn't do that either until the very end, where it's like, oh, there's a change in Nebuchadnezzar. And I also just want to make a quick note on verse 28. It says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Remember last week we talked about how like we actually don't even know who this Darius guy is, because historically it was Cyrus. So it's like, is it two people? And then, but here's the thing, right? Just that the phrase "in the reign of Cyrus," it also could be translated as "that is the reign of Cyrus," right? So again, like Darius and Cyrus could be the same person, right? And again, not important, but it is one of those things where it's like there's this uncertainty here, but maybe it's really not. Okay, so gone through that. So Daniel, right? He has incredible quality. He's faithful. He's got quiet humility. He's got a lot of hard work. His great work ethic, and he has integrity. Okay, so kind of take those characteristics of what Daniel is like and what we're supposed to be like, and just kind of like, I don't know, like put them in a little separate tab in the upper corner of your brain. All right, that is what we're supposed to emulate. Unfortunately, this is often not how we in the church and the church as a whole has acted and behaved. And what I want to do, and I'll try to do this quickly, is I want to kind of walk you through a little bit of American church history to kind of show you and kind of walk you through, like, why aren't we like this? Like, what happened in the church world to kind of get us to the in a sense, oftentimes the opposite of what Daniel is like. Okay, so I'm going to share with you like three things. Okay, all of which have some truth to them, right? And that's the thing, right? The biggest, the stickiest, and the most dangerous lies always have some truth to them. It's just truth that's a little bit twisted, and then it just gets ugly. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through that a little bit so we can understand, like, oh, this it kind of makes sense how, like, we as a church kind of got to where we are. Okay? First thing, okay, guy named Cornelius van Til. He is a Dutch theologian and philosopher, kind of like in the early 20th century. He was born in 1895, died in 1987. So, like, not that long. I know, I think it's like 80s. I was born in the 80s, so it's like not that long ago for some of the students. They're like, what? Like, but that was the previous century. Like, did you even have colored pictures back then? Yes, we did, okay? All right, so it's not that long ago. He taught at Westminster Theological Seminary, which is kind of outside of Philly. And that's a really reputable and good institution. So what I'm trying to say is he's not a bad guy, okay? Like, this is a really good theologian. He did have this idea. It's basically this. Sin hurts a person's ability to reason, okay? And yes, sin absolutely affects all areas of our lives, including our brains and the way we think. Like, that's absolutely true. And so that's not like a crazy statement, right? But then he goes, therefore, right, only Christians, because of the Holy Spirit, right, are truly reasonable and sane, right? Because sin has affected our ability to reason, and we're basically like we've gone crazy, right? Because we're sinful. Oh, okay, then it's you need the Holy Spirit to kind of like regenerate your brain, and therefore only Christians are reasonable and sane. Do you see how that can be a little problematic if you abuse that idea? Right? Like, the idea is like, oh yeah, absolutely, sin affects our brain. Like, absolutely, right? Like, but you just twist a little bit, right? And here's the thing, I will say, I'm not an expert on Van Til, so like as it is possible that he was like, I didn't mean this. Other people took my idea and ran with it. That happens all the time, right? Where like somebody has this idea, it's actually really good, and then somebody else like twists it a little bit, right? So I don't know if like he made it this way or this is what had happened, but this is what kind of is happening, okay? Take that idea and then park it into another tab in your brain, okay? Next guy, R.J. Rushdoony, right? I actually love that last name. That's just a great last name. He is an American theologian and philosopher, a little bit younger than Van Til. He was born in 1916, and he actually just died in 2001. Okay, so he's kind of like doing his thing in like the 50s and 60s, like so not that long ago, but it is a little while ago. Okay, and so he started a theology called dominion theology. Okay, and he was heavily influenced by Van Til. And so here's the idea. Okay, the idea is this. It would be great to have faithful, godly people in places of leadership and government who will lead righteously. Well, that's a good idea, right? And that's totally, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there are like ministries like focused on that, right? Right now, there's a campus ministry called Christian Union, and they're like in a sense their mission is they try to have their little chapters in elite universities and are being like trying to disciple people, right? And their idea is that hey, a lot of these kids in elite universities, they're going to go on to be the future generations of the world. So wherever God sends them, we want them to be mature believers, people who understand the word and are discipled well. So wherever they end up, like they're going to like be the light of the world in in high places. Right? That's great. It's an incredible ministry. But dominion theology takes that idea and Van Til's idea of that only Christians are like reasonable and sane, and kind of just abuse it a little bit and twist it. And the idea, the dominion theology basically goes, since only Christians are the truly like sane and reasonable people in the world, then Christians should control and dominate government, right? And because they're the only ones who are reasonable, there shouldn't be other people in government and in high places because like you don't want those people there because they're not reasonable and sane, right? And so there's this idea of, hey, Christians should dominate these areas of life, of government and society, and if it has to be done by force, that's okay too, because this is what's like right? So all of a sudden, it's not about faith anymore. I mean, it's all like, it's all using the language of faith in Jesus, but it's about dominating like earthly spheres, right? Government and that kind of stuff, okay? So now take that idea and put into a third tab, okay? Last one is this, the Christian persecution complex, right? This is an idea that the US government and society are actively trying to oppress Christians, right? And are there people who don't like Christians? Yeah, absolutely, right? I mean, Nick in the mission moment shared a lot about that, about what is happening when it comes to Christian persecution. But what's happening in America compared to kind of what's happening around the world, like compared to what's happening in China and North Korea and Russia and Iran and all those kind of places, is really, it's not comparable, okay? And so in America, we have this like Christian persecution complex, and it's like, well, where did this start? And we're not sure when it started, but some people think it started in the 60s when the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional for school officials to compose and recite a prayer in a public school, right? And I kind of worded it that way because it's a little bit complex. A lot of times people just say, oh yeah, the Supreme Court banned prayer in school. Not exactly, right? It was a little bit nuanced to it. But some people think at that point, that's when Christians really started to be like, oh, we're persecuted, and therefore, we got to do something, right? Some people think it's more like the 80s and 90s when the LGBTQ movement really started getting going, and a lot of the new laws were passed, right? So we're not really sure, but that's kind of approximately where it is, right? And so you take these ideas, right? Only Christians are sane and reasonable. The current government and society actively oppresses and persecutes Christians, and that Christians should dominate government and society and culture. You take those ideas and you kind of just like smash them together, and then take it a couple steps more. The natural progression is what we see in some very influential areas of Christianity today, right? Where like the mentality is, hey, this is spiritual warfare. Well, spiritual warfare is absolutely real, but like, right? The mentality is, hey, we have to be combative, right? We cannot, there's no more room for grace. Like humility is not important because we have to dominate society, government, and the world for the kingdom of God. Like that's what we see now, right? It's always been there, right? It's just that right now there's some really influential Christian figures that are really like just influential and gaining a lot of power. And so we see that we're seeing that more, right? And all of this really lacks integrity too, right? And actually, among these Christians, one of the ideas they promote is something called righteous deception, which is basically saying it's okay and justified to lie and deceive if it's for like the kingdom of God, right? And some of you might be like, whoa. I was like, yeah, it's like literally, it's called, the idea is called righteous deception. And they use the Egyptian midwives in Exodus 1 as an example, right? It's an abusive interpretation of Exodus 1, but that's what they'll say. They'll say, well, the Egyptian midwives lied to Pharaoh, and God commended them for that and blessed them, right? But there's like a big difference between like, hey, you have the option to lie and save innocent lives, or tell the truth and get a ton of people killed, versus, hey, I'm just gonna like lie as a part of my political job to like kind of gain power and influence. Okay, so it's like it's not a great theological defense of that. Okay, so now take all of this and now let's bring it back to Daniel. Okay, so So we're seeing, and this is kind of like the for us, because I said earlier, right, the main idea today is really let's be like Daniel, right? And so now we're seeing, we have Daniel who is faithful, he's humble, he's full of integrity, he has this quiet humility about him, right? And we contrast it with what we're seeing in some Christian circles today in our world, where it's combative, right? Grace is out the window. Humility, not important. Integrity, not important, right? In some areas, they even look at empathy as a bad thing, right? They're like, oh, empathy is like, people take advantage of empathy, so we don't want to be empathetic, right? A lot of these things they're happening, and the question for us is, okay, how can we be like Daniel and avoid this common pitfall that is really afflicting the church in the United States right now, right? Because this kind of stuff, it's like, a lot of times we think, well, no, this is like, no, it's still a minority of Christians, but the influence is really great. And so how do we avoid this pitfall? And that's what's important today, okay? And I think it's this. The first thing is this, humility. Humility is so key to our faith, right? Because with humility, you have this, like, in a sense, this battle between entitlement and gratitude, right? Because when you don't have humility, you're going to start feeling entitled. And with entitlement, it's ultimately selfish, and it leads ultimately to forcing people to do what you want, right? Because if you're not humble and you feel entitled, you're going to eventually want, like, hey, I should have this. Like, we as Christians should have these things. And if we don't, and we're the good guys, then we got to, like, force people, right? That's kind of what happens when you don't have humility. Whereas gratitude, when we're just thankful for what God has done in our lives. So we're thankful to see, like, I am a sinner, and yet God in his infinite grace, like, loved me and died for my sins. Like, I'm just thankful, right? When that happens, when that's what's in your heart, it leads to selflessness. Because you don't think of yourself as someone who is so great and worthy. You're just so thankful that this is what God has done in your life, and you want to tell people about it, right? And it's like if they don't want to believe or don't want to follow the same thing you follow, it's like you're sad about it, but you're not like, well, I got to force you, right? Because you're just thankful for what God has already done in your life. And then what happens is gentleness then follows that, right? You're going to have a life that is gentle with your faith, right? How it kind of comes out. And it always allows for freedom, okay? So I think that's the first thing, is humility is so key. The second thing is being Christ-centered, having a Christ-centered focus. And what that means is that our eyes, our minds, and our hearts are focused on Jesus and what Jesus is focused on, right? So instead of thinking like, okay, like we got to do these things to the kingdom where our eyes are actually starting to like leave Jesus, we say, okay, let me just look at Jesus. Let me take a look at him in the Bible. What did Jesus care about? And that's what I'm going to focus on, right? And when you do that, you're going to realize, oh, the things that you start to focus on is not like, oh, that like, you're not going to focus on like control and kind of like, power and that kind of stuff. You're going to start focusing on grace and mercy and forgiveness, right? So all of a sudden, you're not going to have this like us versus them mentality, right? Which is so easy, right? Because that's like human nature of like us and then them, and we always have to define who us is and how do we like justify us and them. They're the bad guys. We got to like do something about that, right? It becomes about grace, right? Grace, the undeserving gift. It's like, oh, there are people who don't like us. How do I give them a gift that they don't deserve, right? How can I continue to be kind to them even though they may not reciprocate, right? And so it's grace, it's mercy, and ultimately it's forgiveness, right? And when that is what's in your heart, it changes everything, right? It changes how we approach those who don't like us, right? And it changes our approach to everything. And it becomes more like Daniel and less like what we see in some Christian circles, okay? And And another thing that Jesus does, which is really interesting, is Jesus is actually really critical of the religious establishment. Right? It wasn't like Jesus never like said anything critical to anybody. He was super critical of the religious establishment, the Pharisees, right? But here's the thing. The religious establishment, that's us. Right? Like I'm a pastor here, we're in a church, we have this building, like we are the religious establishment. And so Jesus is most critical of us. So when we think about when we start wanting to be critical, it should be inward focus first. Being like, hey, how am I behaving and acting? Am I being like Jesus? Right? Because the thing to do, it's easy to always point fingers out. And the church has done that a lot. We always look at these different groups and saying, look at them. They don't love God. They don't love this. They don't love that. And they're wrong, and we got to do something about it. Jesus rarely did that. Jesus always looked at the people who are supposed to be the most spiritual, and the criticism always goes to that group the most, and that's us, right? We as Christians, we should be looking at, wait, okay, hey, don't worry about what other people who are not Christians do or say. I mean, we can see that and be like, hey, that's not what we do, but we should first look at, hey, are we being like Christ? Are we giving grace? Are we being merciful? Are we being forgiving? Are we doing that? That should be our first, when it comes to self-reflection and criticism like that, it should be on ourselves first, okay? And then the last thing is this, what you see Jesus do over and over and over again. He is gracious and kind to the outcast, to the vulnerable, to the sinners, right? He goes and eats with sinners, and that was one of the big complaints about Jesus. Jesus, don't you know the people you're hanging out with are sinners? And Jesus is like, yeah, yes, I do, right? And it's the sinners that need, that need Jesus, right? The problem is we just sometimes forget that we're the sinners too. Again, we're always outward focused, okay? And so Jesus is gracious, the kind, the outcast, gracious and kind to the outcast, the vulnerable, and to sinners, right? And so when you start to do that, right, when you start to have a Christ-centered focus, it really makes it impossible for you to then say, oh, I need to be more combative with my faith. All of a sudden the idea of standing up for your faith is somehow kind of in your face and that kind of stuff just starts to not make sense anymore when Jesus is your focus, right? You start to, other things we got to do is we got to start focusing on grace and not domination, right? And so when we do that, all these things start to make sense. Right? It's like, oh yeah, to be like Daniel, we do these things. We're like, okay, look at his characteristics. Look at how we're going to be Christ-centered. Hey, grace and not domination should be our kind of the spirit of how we think about how our faith should be, right? And then when it comes to holiness comes out of our love for God, right? It's not about hey, there's the right way to live, and everyone should do it, and let's make rules and laws to kind of force those. It becomes about, no, holiness is because I love God, and I love his creation and his design for life, and out of that, I'm going to follow, God's, rules of holiness, right? Which is kind of weird because it's a lot of times we kind of twist that and say, yeah, holiness is good and we should do these, but it's this look at them, they're not doing it, and therefore we need to do something about it, when it should be, no, I love God, I love Jesus because what he has done in my life, and even though I continue to struggle with sin, because of my love for God, I'm going to keep striving for holiness. That's the right way to go about it. And so we often have it backwards, unfortunately. And right now we're in a kind of an era in our history where there's it's almost like this weird there's this weird battle where there are definitely groups of Christians that are very much, hey, it's about control and domination, and then those and Christians who are like, no, like it's about Jesus and being faithful, right? They'll use the same language, but it's very different. And so for us, we need to be like Daniel, right? Be people of humility, be people of integrity, right? Be people who kind of go about our faith in a way that is very bold when called upon, but also quiet at times, okay? And so that's my prayer for myself, my prayer to you, and I hope that as we live out our faith more like Daniel, what happens is people who don't know Jesus will see it and see like, oh, that's what being a Christ follower is about. And like our example will be that light to the world. So let's pray.